we're going to start it off with a presentation by Aditya, and he is going to talk about visualization as a design and planning tool for complete streets projects. So I'll turn it over to him.
Great. All right. Thanks, Heidi. And thanks for coming here this afternoon. My name is Aditya Inandar. I'm an urban designer and planner with Kettleson and Associates in our Baltimore office. And today I'm going to talk about visualization as design and planning tool for complete streets project. Visualizations or like graphic representations are helpful for a wide variety of projects, but for complete streets projects they're especially helpful because of the multidisciplinary nature of complete streets and the planning process that kind of follows that. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Also, just to begin with, I'll say like my whole presentation is kind of premised on a cliche that a picture is worth more than 1,000 words, and I think it's more apt in this context than anywhere I've ever seen. When we talk about visualizations, it's really information that is presented graphically, and when we look at these icons or logos, they're kind of all around us, and they communicate information that we kind of easily understand and respond to, and we don't think about them that much, but they're almost like graphics. And it really helps in easier communication for a wide variety of people. So how do they relate to complete streets? Well, as I said, complete streets, as I see it, is a complex multidisciplinary process where you have a variety of professionals from different disciplines coming together to solve a variety of issues. So they're like complex goals and objectives. Each discipline has their own body of knowledge, their dogma, for lack of a better word, that kind of comes in the process, and visualizations help kind of bring all those different aspects together. They kind of integrate it to create a common language so everybody understands, and they're helpful in kind of internal as well as external communication during the process. So as I said, when you talk about complete streets, you really have these different things happening all together. You have, transit planning and station design, even as simple as like bus stops. You have, traffic engineers looking at geometric design and all sorts of things like signal design, landscape architects talking about green infrastructure, architects talking about buildings and how they kind of relate to sidewalks and the ground floor, permeability, and that's so important to walkability as part of complete streets projects. Urban designers and planners talking about placemaking. We have zoning and redevelopment issues that are at times handled through complete streets projects, and of course, economic development. One of the goals is to kind of rejuvenate some of these streets to bring back life along the corridors. And all these have, as I said, different aspects to them, and each profession kind of brings their own body of knowledge into it, and graphics kind of help them integrate it all together to have a common language to speak to each other. When we compare to some of the other disciplines, architects, landscape architects, urban designers have always kind of relied on the power of visualization in their work. They've always been able to use graphics like this to communicate complex ideas and design, but also to sell a place and special characteristics of a place. And we talk about watercolor renderings a lot, but they kind of really help you put you in a mood that kind of explains where this place is, helps you imagine your life in that place. And someone who kind of does drawings like these, I'll tell you, there's a lot of detail that goes into thinking about it. What kind of landscape you want to show, what kind of buildings, what kind of architecture, what kind of activities are happening on the street. For example, here, clearly we want to kind of highlight that this is a place where you can grow your life. There's different types of housing types for different people. Wide set of demographics can be interested in this. You can have your small children kind of walk along a shared street. You can bike, skate, you can hang out with friends, and it kind of helps you put in a place that can imagine your life in that place. And of course, an interesting development in the last few years has been the role of graphics in policy documents, and form-based codes is a really great example how graphics are integrated in kind of communicating complex regulatory language. And it's also kind of, it helps to, again, communicate those complex ideas to a wider audience, and in effect, it helps the document become more effective because a lot of people who are non-technical also understand the ideas that are represented in those documents. In terms of transportation and complete streets, we're almost having a watershed moment, starting with complete street guidelines. and then followed by NACTO guidebooks, and there's so much more that's every month there's a new guidebook that comes out even from FHWA, and it kind of has completely changed the way we look at street design. It's a different paradigm from as if you compare it to older kind of traffic engineering manuals. And when I look at these changes, I just don't look at them as superficially like, oh wow, cool graphics. It's much more fundamental change than that. Again, it's kind of bringing in those other disciplines, architects, landscape, urban designers, into the street design process, which wasn't the case earlier. So it's kind of this multidisciplinary, collaborative effort, and visualization is really the kind of the glue that kind of combines all of those together. So again, technically accurate yet easy to understand visualizations can act not just as a communication tool, but also an integral tool in the whole process. So I would kind of encourage you to think about visualization not as just an end product or a product that's just to be used for public outreach, but as a tool to be used throughout the process. And visualization types like renderings, animations, even plans and cross sections, diagrams have kind of a role to play to illustrate certain ideas and designs at different stages of the project. So there are four broad ways in which I see visualizations being kind of integrated into the process. The first being an internal communication tool to kind of bring that interdisciplinary collaboration as part of the process. To compare multiple alternatives, I think it's really helpful, especially early on in the project when you're looking at a long list of alternatives, kind of visualize them and have them on a single piece of paper to kind of compare and contrast. And of course, a major use is to utilize them as a communication tool in stakeholder engagement and public outreach. And finally, they could be used as a marketing tool to kind of generate public support, even raise financial resources to actually implement the project. So I'm going to run through some of the projects that I've been involved in the last couple of years. Let's start with Goodman Square, which is a recent project in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Alec talked about this project a bit in his presentation yesterday in Roundabouts. I don't know how many of you were there for that. But this is a really complex intersection in Cambridge. You have these two kind of major streets, Hampshire Street and Cambridge Street, kind of intersecting at a skewed angle. You had three smaller streets kind of coming into the intersection. It's kind of built out. There's right-of-way constraints. There's a fire station right here, which is also a historic building. You have a small park. You have bus stops. You have a bike share station. So it's a complex urban condition. And unfortunately, there was the fatal accident of a cyclist a year ago, I think, and that kind of highlighted the need to relook at this intersection to redesign for bicycle safety. And the city was looking at options of bending in Hampshire Street or Cambridge Street, kind of create two intersections. They also, I think, initially looked at a roundabout option, but they deemed it infeasible, maybe because of right-of-way constraints. But we were kind of approached by Boston Cyclists Union, a nonprofit group, to kind of reevaluate the feasibility of a roundabout. And we kind of took up the challenge, and Alec was kind of able to drill into a lot of engineering details to kind of lay this out and see if it really works. A lot of detailed geometric design went into it, understanding how the cycle tracks can be protected throughout the intersection along the roundabout. We kind of came up with a design which was like two mini roundabouts that are connected, so it kind of got branded as a peanut about, and it got a lot of traction because of that, and it was kind of communicated well across within the profession as well. But initially, when Alec came up with this drawing, we were really excited that this is a feasible option. We can kind of really make this happen. But we were not very thrilled about showing this as an engineering drawing to a larger audience because, as you can see, it's a very hard drawing to read into with all the different aspects happening along it, like the pedestrian circulation, the bicycle, how the fire trucks would move along. So there's a lot of things that are happening which are not easily understood with a graphic like this. So we decided to do a rendering. We kind of pulled up that CAD drawing in SketchUp. We were able to lay it over an existing aerial in Photoshop and show through textures and materials how these different things kind of function together. So you had your kind of multiple truck aprons, kind of pedestrian crossings that are raised, the cycle tracks that are protected throughout the intersection. And this was really helpful to kind of communicate this complex idea to larger audience. And we had a public workshop where this was presented. It was pretty well received. we got very good feedback, and this point kind of gets missed at times is, if you have a complex idea, if you have new concepts that you're presenting, if you don't have good graphics or visualization to present them, people don't understand or they're not able to process it, and then you won't get good feedback. So in order to get good feedback, you need visualization that would kind of clearly, simply explain what the design is. And that really helped us to get good feedback. And we kind of went back to our drawing boards, kind of redesigned this to incorporate some of the feedback, especially as it related to turning radius, the cycle tracks. Kind of, we had some more space with the park to play with, so we kind of increased the diameter of the roundabout on the northern side. We also had a landscape architect as one of our stakeholders who came up with this sketch. She was interested in kind of highlighting the public space and how the landscape elements kind of come together to create this place. And we kind of incorporated some of her ideas into it as well, and to create this rendering with the stage 2, where we kind of included some of the public space elements, the park, some of the new landscape elements into it, but also kind of showing how all the different multimodal circulation happens along the roundabout. So I think visualization played a really key role in the whole process, and unfortunately the city didn't select this one. They're going on the option, but we're really excited to see how this whole process played out and how visualization played a role in kind of communicating this very complex idea to a larger audience. Another project, Sycamore Street in Arlington, Virginia. This was a project that was funded through MWCOG, which is the NPO in DC. We're also kind of working with the county to kind of come up with a complete street plan, and had corrected intersections. And this was going to be the first corrected intersection in that region. A new idea. We want to kind of communicate this to the larger audience. We came up with these sketches. We had an engineering drawing kind of laying out all the details, but again, as you can see, very hard to kind of understand all the details. So we kind of came up with this SketchUp drawing where it kind of showed all the different aspects, including where the signal heads and bicycle signals would go. And there was a whole piece of the report which talked about the signal phasing and how this would work, but also kind of showing the general suburban context and how the bicycle needs protection through this intersection because of this really big intersection, and showing how pedestrians accommodated around it. Also on the same project, we had another intersection which talked about a channelized right that, we had peds and cycle tracks kind of crossing it, and there was a need to kind of slow the right turning traffic down, but it needed to be accessible for buses to turn. So we came up with a stable crossing idea, and again, these drawings were really good in kind of laying out the technically accurate aspects of it, like where the curves would go, how the drainage would be accommodated. But again, drawings like these were very helpful to communicate the overall idea, how this would work. And then it's not just three-dimensional drawings or renderings, but it also kind of cross-sections that we use kind of almost on all projects, where you're kind of comparing the existing condition. This is a project in Reading, Pennsylvania. Penn Street was kind of the main street that connects Schuylkill River Trail to the west, to the city park on the east. And there was a need to kind of connect these two open spaces with a cycle track that we were coming up with design for. And we designed an option where, so right now in the existing condition you had really wide travel lanes, 15-foot wide travel lanes with parking on both sides. We came up with an option which was kind of reducing the lane widths, keeping the parking, but adding a two-way cycle track. And as we started kind of detailing out this design, there was a question about how to accommodate transit and bus stops. And the transit agency was kind of adamant on having bus pullouts, especially because the lanes are going to be so narrow and it's just one lane in each direction, that they wanted to pull out the bus from the travel lane. So we came up with these ideas of how this cross-section would be accommodated at bus stops. So if you have westbound buses, the parking would drop, and kind of parking on the other side will also kind of get narrowed, so we have a larger buffer to get the bus pull out. On the lower cross-section, we're showing how it happens in the eastbound direction, where your cycle track is kind of raised for that condition, where it's kind of boarding and alighting platform as well as cycle track, and kind of slowing some of the cycling traffic as well with the raised ramps. But we were able to show through these graphics that we were able to accommodate these different conditions along the corridor. We were working with Flora Future Landscape Architects, who were really good at kind of laying out this typical cross sections on a plan view to kind of show the different aspects and how it will kind of change at special conditions like this plaza, about and how all the landscape elements are kind of integrated as part of this project. And of course, we had renderings that showed how each of the intersections on the corridor would look like in this new design. And again, as I said, these were very helpful in the public outreach process, in our public meetings. People really got what changes are happening, what are the benefits and trade-offs that come with it. Because of the renderings, the plans, and the cross-sections, there was kind of a holistic understanding of what's changing and what's happening there. The second broad way to kind of include visualizations in the process is when you're comparing alternatives. And again, a lot of these corridor studies kind of, especially after existing conditions, we kind of come up with a long list of alternatives, and tools like StreetMix, which is, online website I'm sure many of you know, is very effective in kind of quickly coming up with these cross sections. And with very little post-processing, you can kind of put them on a same piece of paper and compare it. Like in this instance, we wanted to make sure that we're not touching the right-of-way lines or even the curb lines, because moving curbs and drainage was going to be cost prohibitive. So almost was a kind of a restriping project. So within the alternatives, we're talking about 4-lane undivided, kind of doing a road diet with 3 lanes. The first option doing bike lanes, so going down to 2 lanes with a protected bike lane option with potted plants or kind of movable furniture in it, and then having the third option as parking on one side with a 2-way cycle track. But these kind of help to compare and contrast and kind of rank them, if you would, to kind of limit the alternatives that you're going to kind of take forward into next stage of design. We generally use this option when it's kind of the first kind of cut at it. It's mostly internal communication. We're trying to understand all the options out there. But when you're taking it to the public, street mid sections are good, but they also have kind of a universality quality to it. Like they're placeless. Like it's very hard to show some of the details or the context in these drawings. So renderings like, these are really helpful for the community members to visualize the changes in their particular area on their particular street. This is a street in North Miami, which is again kind of 4-lane undivided with parking on both sides. And we were looking at options where you're kind of doing a road diet with spot medians, 3-lane cross section, parking with buffered bike lanes, adding street trees, or a landscape curb separated protected bike lanes. So again, options like these are really helpful for people to kind of visualize what all alternatives we're evaluating and to kind of have them rank what they like and what they don't like. Kind of similar project in Edgewood, Florida, just south of Orlando. This is Orange Avenue. This is the area where it kind of splits into one-way couplets. Right now it's got 3-lane, really wide with a bike lane. We're looking at options of a buffered bike lane that is, some parking is on the curb side, you have a double buffered bike lane. And again, these ideas, buffered bike lanes in Florida are relatively new. They were not that many implemented. So the community members are not still sure how it works. So part of this is also an educational opportunity to kind of help them understand how this would function. The other option is parking protected buffered bike lane. And again, not many places in Florida have this. I don't know if any place has parking protected bike lanes, but a lot of community members have a lot of kind of concern about how would you park in the middle of the street with bike lane on one side and travel lanes on the other. So these kind of help visualize some of those aspects. This option is where you have parking on the other side with some left turn pockets, and the other option is kind of second phase of the first option, where you have redevelopment that kind of spurred through investments in streets and hopefully kind of starts creating that main street environment that the city was looking for. This is a project where in Alameda, California, where we were doing kind of a packet for a grant application, and we were doing conceptual design for a 2-way cycle track in this industrial corridor, and we were looking at ways to communicate some of the design ideas as part of the grant application, and we decided to make it much more graphical than in the past. And we had these plan sheets where, these were CAD drawings. These were all like technically accurate, but we decided that we would show all the striping and the hatching so that people kind of know what it is, rather than just having a black and white CAD drawing and simple cross sections, or even diagrams like these where issues like ADA accessibility, where you had this utility pole bang in the middle of a 5-foot sidewalk. So people were not able to navigate around it, especially people in wheelchairs. We had ideas where we take a parking spot keep the drainage with a grade, but have a sidewalk extension, so, you know, the wheelchair could go over the grade and around the pole. Or where we were adding street trees, kind of similar treatment with landscape islands. And diagrams like this were really helpful to kind of illustrate smaller concepts that would happen along the corridor. And of course, the rendering that showed the existing condition where you have an old trolley track, which is not used anymore, but to show how the two-way cycle track would work, at intersections, how people could get in and out of the cycle track along the cross streets, curb extensions and pedestrian facilities with street trees. It really kind of illustrates the changes that can happen even with keeping the same curb lines and right-of-way lines. Again, going back to the guidebooks, it's been very helpful to kind of illustrate some of these graphics to show different aspects to complete streets. This was a graphic we did for a Metro Plan in Orlando, which is the MPO there. It's part of the Complete Streets Handbook, where we were showing the whole toolbox that communities have to kind of use to do complete street projects in their communities. So you're talking about transit elements, pedestrian, bicycle, but also land use changes that can happen. This is an interesting project. Actually, it's a proposal. Unfortunately, we didn't win it, but we were kind of using visualizations to illustrate even the implementation and funding strategy. So, you know, you had the existing condition where you got a rail right-of-way in downtown Billings, which is not used anymore, but you had some old industrial buildings around it. The city wanted to create a linear park around that track within the right-of-way. And our strategy was, in the first phase, we'll kind of do a linear park within the rail right-of-way, but also kind of recommend changes in zoning, which would allow redevelopment to happen with some, you know, extra FAR, but regulations like extra setback to allow for a wider park to happen along the corridor. And kind of illustrate them through rendering. So this is the existing condition. In the first phase, you have within the right-of-way a trail and landscape elements, but in the second phase, you have kind of a setback with extra space and a linear plaza that kind of runs along. They wanted to run a historic trolley that kind of would run along the corridor in the downtown area. This is a recent project in Baltimore, kind of a trail project that we were looking at two options. One was putting a path, a shared use path down the median. The other option was taking parking on one side and putting a two-way cycle track. For a variety of reasons, we decided to kind of pursue with option one, but the community had concerns about what would happen to the landscape median. They didn't really want to see a 12-foot concrete path down the median because, you know, it was kind of green and nice mature trees in the median. They were concerned about what would happen to trees. So through this rendering, we were kind of able to tell them that it doesn't have to be a 12-foot concrete path. It could be a different material, different texture, which is much more kind of context specific. You could add pedestrian facilities as well as landscape elements that would kind of help this place overall. With you know, renderings like these are kind of double-edged swords. I mean, when you're showing so much detail, you also have to be careful that, you know, going forward, if this doesn't happen or if there's changes in design, you know, there might be community blowback because, you know, you're showing so much detail. So you got to be kind of careful about what you're showing and kind of, you know, be aware of the local politics and the design that might happen, because some of these things might be cost prohibitive going forward. So it's a little cautionary tale. Finally, this project is a countywide planning study in Brevard County, Florida for Space Coast TPO. We were kind of coming with countywide GIS analysis to identify complete street corridors that are kind of ready to kind of have design plans for, and, you know, which had the right land use mix, the right transit and pedestrian bicycle ridership numbers that could, you know, kind of work well for complete street investments. So we did a countywide study to come up with the corridors, but also we had workshops with local municipalities to come up with designs. I'll show a couple of them. This is Hickory Street in Melbourne, which kind of, this street kind of connects the downtown area to the hospital district up there. There's this lake and a park around it, which kind of connects those two. And we were planning to create a kind of a two-block shared space, kind of a moon Earth-like condition, which would become festival areas on the weekend. So we were using, you know, different textures and materials, kind of a curbless street, But again, this was a very different idea for the local community, so drawings like these were very helpful to communicate what's happening and also kind of show how it would change over time, like on weekends and festivals. It would kind of closed off the traffic and be used as a public space for our festivals and farmers market. Another corridor for the same project we worked on, excuse me, this is Florida Avenue in Cocoa. This was kind of the northern end of the corridor, so we wanted to kind of create a gateway element. There was this Y intersection with really wide lanes, a lot of asphalt, and there's this restaurant on the left which is very popular in the area, but as you can see, and there's a City Hall parking on this side. So there's City Hall, a very famous restaurant, but there was no pedestrian crossing to get there. So very difficult intersection for pedestrians. And we came up with an idea of just like simply narrowing down lanes, creating curb extension and landscape areas to create gateway features like that little plaza, and really to create an environment where you know, you kind of, when you enter this corridor, you kind of feel that something's changing. There's the start of the corridor. This was an option where we had just the curb extensions. Another option where we kind of had an option of doing a land swap with this property owner, because this little street was just kind of serving southbound lane to that parking lot. And we were able to get more spaces with this land swap option and create a larger parklet. And as I've said, for like public outreach and stakeholder engagement is really a big part of where these visualizations are really useful. These ideas, you know, we have a lot of corridor planning meetings where, you know, you're just kind of laying out these large plans and cross sections and drawings, and we get really valuable feedback when we have drawings that are easily understood by people. We also had, like, for roundabouts, we had these scale models where people could actually kind of, you know, play with cars and understand how roundabouts work. So finally, I would just, you know, kind of a couple of takeaways for seamless integration in graphics. I think in the design and planning process, I think it's important to include them as part of your scopes, budgets, and staffing decisions. It's really difficult at the last minute to bring someone and kind of do it. You have to kind of rework a lot of drawings, but if you coordinate from day one, you kind of know how to use the CAD work for the SketchUp model, for the Photoshop work, and it's much more easier once you have coordination within the team. And finally, again, to think of visualizations beyond just end product or you know, deliverable. It's really the way it's part of the thinking process and workflow that needs to be integrated. So you're at every stage, you're kind of drawing and visualizing what designs you're doing. And it would really help to bring wider audience into the process and participate. Okay. A couple of thoughts on where I think we are headed. I think, you know, we kind of keep seeing newer and newer software every year. This is Esri City Engine, which is kind of more parametric design, where you can kind of, you know, put some inputs and get a model out pretty quick. Street Mix is another kind of easier tool that's relatively new. One thing that I've found out is that when you have, you know, tools like this, which are parametric, there's a limited library, there's limited options that you can use with, and I feel like pedestrian bicycle planning is like evolving almost by the hour, like every day, every month there's something new, and these tools are kind of limited in a way that you could kind of utilize the latest and greatest in your designs. And also, I think, you know, with Google Cardboard, with VR headsets, I mean, this is a project that I think Tool worked on, but they utilized, for LADOT, they utilized Owl Eyes, which is a company that would kind of bring in SketchUp models and be able to kind of do 360 images, so you can kind of look at it and pan around like the street view to see around what the new designs are, and you could kind of put it so that, you know, it's like existing and proposed kind of superimposed, so you can kind of be actually in the place and kind of rotate 360 and look around and see what the designs are. All right, well, thank you so much. I don't know if you're going to take questions in the end or...
We're going to be having questions at the end, but if anybody has one that they want to ask while Dave's getting set up, we can do that now.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
I'll just echo, I like to wrap up points about thinking about, in particular, some of the cooler, like SketchUp style designs. Think about that real early, like even in the RFP process.
Yeah.
And thinking that as part of it, because we've had a couple of projects where we've tried to tack that on, and it's been awkward from a funder side, and it's been awkward, I'm sure, from a staff side too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in the future we're going to try to work that stuff in
Yeah.
right from the get-go. So-
Right, and one point I'll add is, once you coordinate from the get-go, the overall cost of something like this is dramatically reduced.
Yeah.
Because you can utilize so much of stuff that's already going to be done to create these visualizations. So it looks very expensive, but in the end, it's not if you coordinate well. That's part of the budget process.
Good.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you.
Okay, well, we'll have more time for questions at the end, but now we'll hear from Wade Walker, who's going to do a presentation on making connections, creating a robust cycling network in Chattanooga.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, it's confession time. I'm actually an engineer. Any other engineers in the room? All right, surrounded by friends. How many planners? Landscape architects? Okay, glad to see you guys all coexisting in the same room together, because that's really how this kind of thing gets done, is through multidisciplinary collaboration. So some of the best projects are done by collaborations among engineers, planners, and landscape architects. I mean, our whole design studio, implementation studio is built around that concept. We actually do have engineers and landscape architects working together, developing construction documents, believe it or not. Variable cats and dogs sleeping together, if you will. Second confession, I'm actually a native of the Memphis area. So welcome to my home. I hope you guys are having a really good time here. I can tell you the change that has been, the change that has happened here over the past 10 years has been mind-boggling. And I hope you're enjoying it. There's some great things on the ground to see, and some great food to have. I'm sure everybody's sampled the local cuisine. Anybody going to have to go on a Lipitor prescription when they get home, I'm sure, but certainly enjoy it. So that said, I'm actually going to tell you a little bit of another Tennessee community in Chattanooga. So Chattanooga is located about an hour and a half north of Atlanta. Chattanooga has been doing this kind of thing since about the mid-1990s. Really started to focus on downtown, doing some very transformative kinds of projects. And we're one of the first ones to really start looking at transportation design more through a lens of urban design and really focusing on their downtown. And part of what, one of the things that really makes Chattanooga different is they have an in-house Department of Transportation where it is a multidisciplinary studio that they are looking to do transportation projects. They're doing construction projects, landscape architects, planners, engineers, all within the Department of Transportation. In fact, the head of CDOT is actually an architect, not a landscape architect, but actually an architect, urban designer. Partner with all of these other different agencies as well, and foundations and nonprofits. As you probably heard here in Memphis, the foundations are very active in the community in getting things done. Chattanooga, there's several foundations. Blue Cross Blue Shield is also based there, as well as Volkswagen. So a lot of corporate support for the kinds of initiatives as well. But when we really start looking at Chattanooga historically has not been all that walkable. You see their walk score, very much a car-dependent city, and it's really based on how the city has developed. It's more of a driving city. You see that the urban core located along the Tennessee River right here in downtown, but everything else is kind of this suburban development, more or less. There's some topographic constraints with the river and the different ridges. Chattanooga actually kind of falls in a bowl, if you will. And really not much of a different way to explain it. So what you're seeing is a city that's surrounded by mountains and has developed in a bowl, certainly. But their vision really is this idea of a city of healthy, self-sustaining neighborhoods. And they really have been gearing their transportation, the development of that transportation, focusing on downtown, where they do have suburban development, looking for logical locations to place these walkable nodes, where they do provide facility, where you're catalyzing facilities for people to walk, shop, recreate, and then the connections among all of those. Right now, Chattanooga is not ranking very high with mode share, although they have a lot of initiatives in the works to really boost that with transit, walking, bicycling networks, and really starting to look at things like their implementation of the connected bikeway network. And they do recognize that as they increase that amount of bike facilities, they hope to increase the mode share. They recognize that there is a relationship between those as well. So here you see the kind of the street network in the main part of the city, right near downtown, and this is their biking network within downtown. You see the green, which is the Riverwalk, some of the other protected lane facilities that they have as well. But really, Chattanooga is really looking at things related to bike-oriented development. And what they're trying to look at is they understand that the density and the mix of uses is critical to that. Being able to give people choices about how they move around. You've got corporations there that are trying to attract the best and brightest who value an active lifestyle and may not necessarily want to be saddled by a car. Do we have anybody in the room that has a 16-year-old? Nobody? It's interesting that we're catering to a different demographic these days. We don't, a lot of 16-year-olds don't even have a driver's license. Washington Post reports 41%, in fact, of 16-year-olds in this country do not have a driver's license. Comes as no shock to a colleague of mine and says, yeah, of course kids today don't want to drive. It interferes with their texting. So, really trying to put that, and then starting to quantify that from a cost-benefit standpoint, and really understanding that, the biking can be fun as well, and really trying to interconnect all of the modes, the transit, the bikes, the pedestrians, all within this network. One of the things that Chattanooga really focused on, they have a great asset in their riverfront. So one of the first projects was they created this Riverwalk. And I don't know if any of you have been to Chattanooga and been on the Riverwalk, but got this beautiful facility right along the Tennessee River in downtown Chattanooga. But there's a big bluff there as well. But looking at doing things like the Tennessee Aquarium, the Riverfront Park, the baseball stadium, all right there on the river, and really catalyzing additional development. However, there was a really big problem up until the late 1990s, and it was this big, ugly highway, Riverfront Parkway. Parkway being a very loose term, but this was basically a limited access freeway that cut off downtown from the river. And how Chattanooga used visualization. Now remember, this was late 1990s, so this was pre-Photoshop. But really, Chattanooga said, we really need to be able to get people from downtown to the river, to the Riverwalk, and have them enjoy that. So, in using some very elegant kinds of hand graphics, they developed this scheme that to actually really reimagine how Riverfront Parkway could look. And it was an early iteration of a road diet. So basically a freeway teardown, replacing it with a 2-lane parkway. And it actually gathered a lot of support from the community. And they built it and opened it in the early 2000s, and this is what it looks like today. You see the Tennessee Aquarium in the background, the Riverwalk off to the left. Much different context than what you saw there. And you've also seen a lot of development happen. So a lot of housing development happen along the road that would have never happened along the 4-lane street that was there, or the 4-lane highway that was there previously. Because it really softens that edge, makes it much easier for people to cross. And some of the highest valued housing with the scenes of the Tennessee River and being right there on the transportation facility today. The Riverwalk, you've seen all of this expansion and development along the Riverwalk with the parks, the aquarium, the baseball stadium. And continuing to do that. There's an expansion of the Riverwalk under construction. We'll be continuing in both directions as well. So, looking at Chattanooga's bike implementation plan, they really focused on, the greenways, protected lanes, bike lanes, and then just shared routes to really create this interconnected network within the city. And they use graphics, highly used graphics to advertise this and really sell the community and define this. This is out of their Complete Streets Design Manual. But you see a highly graphical image. We'll touch more on this image in a minute. But much like I was saying is, being able to use this guidebook, show the different elements. So it's kind of a blend between an urban design and an engineering kind of manual. The days of the line drawn AutoCAD cross section with the tick marks is pretty much gone. These are the kinds of things that we're actually using to design streets today, bolstered by all of the additional guidance that we have from an engineering standpoint. Some other projects that they have done is the Broad Street protected lanes. Looking at Broad Street was actually it's actually a 6-lane road, carried a grand total of about 7,500 vehicles a day, made the connection through downtown, terminated at the Tennessee Aquarium, and it's probably the most visitor-oriented corridor in the city. As part of their Center City charrette, developed this concept, which was a Photoshop Photoshop concept, looking at the corridor, overlaying an existing aerial, but just showing how the lane network would work out if you remove 2 of those lanes and repurpose them as something else. And what that something else was and being able to sell that, picture being worth 1,000 words, being able to sell that and looking at what would that actually look like. And so you have the separated by the protected bike lane, the parking, and the repurposing of those outside lanes, and giving people more room to walk. Now, what happens is whenever you start to look at that, how does the funding work and what can you get funding for? City of Chattanooga applied for and received CMAQ funding, but it wouldn't have covered the concept on the left. So in keeping with the design intent, this was one of the things that I was talking about, was being able to communicate to the public whose expectation may be over there as presented in a charrette, why you're doing this on the other side. And it's been communicated very clearly that this is temporary. They wanted to make sure that the design intent was met, and over time, they can go to this as redevelopment occurs. They've got the onus on the property owners as they redevelop, to go in, do the sidewalk treatment, do the raised cycle track as well. But in the meantime, people in Chattanooga can actually use these lanes, and they do use these lanes. In fact, one of the things that, one of the early measures that we found in Chattanooga was they're one of the smallest cities that actually has bike share. And the bike share stations along Broad Street, saw a 30% increase in usage from pre-cycle track to post. So really being able to provide this connection, people are actually using it. It does connect down to the river and the Riverwalk as well. So second phase of the project really looked at using existing pavement, lower cost through resurfacing, and how do you do that through bike lanes. King and Bailey is actually a very interesting project in that it was 3 lanes each, or 4 lanes each direction, one-way pair back in the early 2000s. I actually helped the city in doing the case for conversion of that to 2-way streets, in the midst of many residents, many commuter residents from the suburbs saying, "Oh my gosh, we're going to be stuck in gridlock trying to get in and out of this city." We actually modeled that, did a simulation model, showed how traffic would move. Said, from end of corridor to end of corridor, it's going to cost you about 35 seconds over the entire 4 miles. Is that worth it to be able to reconnect your city? So here we are. That was implemented in 2002. Here we are in 2017, and they're actually going back, taking these roads and actually doing road diets to create bike facilities, to create separated bike lanes on these roads. And it's really about making the connections from the neighborhoods to downtown so that people do have choices about how they move. And so that's King Bailey. Another one is the Virginia Avenue Greenway, Virginia Avenue Neighborhood Greenway project. And really looking at some of these early visualizations about how you create place. The interesting thing about Virginia Avenue is it runs between 2 collector streets through a neighborhood, goes many, many blocks, but most of it looks a lot like this. It's like almost a kind of an alley kind of condition, kind of this front door, back door kind of condition through the neighborhood. But being able to look at ways to actually make that connection. So you see how it comes through the neighborhood. This is actually south of downtown, a historic neighborhood as well. and really being able to make that connection with the existing condition, and this is what it looks like today. So pretty simple kind of configuration. It's about 2 miles long through the neighborhood. Basically creates shared space for walking, biking, and vehicular access to the houses. We closed some of the outlets to the street, turned some pieces so that you can only access the houses and you can't use it as a cut through anymore. But you know, very low stress kind of facility, and been used being used quite a bit. The other thing that it's done is it's spurred additional thought about the area down there. This is the area around where the incline railway goes up to Lookout Mountain. And this is the landing, and there's a neighborhood node, the St. Elmo neighborhood node is down there at the end of the greenway. And now the Riverwalk Extension is going to come in, touch into this neighborhood, make the connection to the greenway. And so they've been thinking about how do they catalyze that, rethink how that neighborhood node works with the coffee shop and the restaurant and Mojo Burrito, which is a little restaurant down there, and trying to create a place around what has simply been a parking lot for the incline railway. So, you know, the Greenway, again, you see some of the funding here as well. You know, it was done with city funds, augmented by foundation funding from the Lindbergh Foundation. You know, all of these projects, the city starts them with a walking tour for stakeholders where they actually walk the corridor, and then usually do a design charrette to come up with the concept as well. And, you know, seen a lot of use from a lot of the different people in the neighborhoods. You know, another example of a project that's underway is Station Street, right in the heart of downtown in the warehouse district. And the idea of this shared space, again, developed through a community charrette process, articulated by the Photoshop photo rendering, and now also under construction. This was also done as part of a stormwater project as well to alleviate flooding within this area. But thinking about something that is being done to alleviate one problem, you're going to have to rip the street up. What do you put it back with? And that's really what they were thinking of with that one. You know, they've also been looking on the northern edge of the river on North Market Street and doing separated bike lanes as well. You know, reducing lanes to do that. How they present that to the community. You know, some of the renderings, the before and afters, and you know, being able to articulate that with drawings about how those kinds of things work. So, you know, what they've done is they've been able to really grow their bike facilities from what they had in 2012. You see the few lines on the maps as far as their greenways and trails, the dedicated bike lanes, bike-friendly streets, and some of their dirt trails. And being able to grow that between 2013 and 2017. You know, this is a real, Chattanooga's had a real push towards some of the protected lane projects. They've finished phase 1 of their protected lanes, and now they're going into phase 2. These are all projects, trails, separated bike lanes, and bike routes that you see funded from there as well. That's the protected bike lane projects for the city as well. So, you know, they're also really looking at, you know, how do they close gaps and provide those transportation choices, and really closing the gaps between transit and bicycling as well. You know, even you know, using the incline railway as potential mobility choices as well, and you know, and really recognizing the importance of cycling as a true mode of transportation. And it's not just in downtown. They're also looking at connections to closer in entities. This is in the area of the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, and their medical district, and along 3rd and 4th Street. And really starting to re-envision some of these larger streets that have much more of a suburban character. And how do you start to re-envision those and really match the traffic and create travel choices on those roads? And being able to use that from a perspective, and being able to visualize that to the community. It is very much a show us how this is going to work kind of community as well. Seeing how it integrates with things like their rail initiative that they have. Looking at commuter rail and how does commuter rail interface with the bus system, with walking, with cycling, with the protected lanes, with automobiles and park and ride. And then what's the spin-off from a redevelopment standpoint? And how can you create housing opportunities and density opportunities in these underutilized corridors, directed around some of these nodes, and really being able to articulate how that works. And then one other really exciting thing is, remember this image of this really ugly road? Well, some of it still exists. As you move east out of the city along the river, you still have some of this really ugly street on Riverfront Parkway, and really starting to think about how does that redevelop? And maybe it is a little different character than what is right in the heart of downtown, but how do you reclaim some of the space and really start to humanize a road that as it comes into downtown, it becomes much more of a parkway. So it's called a parkway, let's make it a parkway. Let's create a linear park along the edge, and being able to give people access to the river, and just generally create a much nicer street, rather than this freeway crashing into a two-lane downtown street as well. So really, what the result in Chattanooga has been is this idea of what they call, let's get our bike mojo on. We see, there's been a lot more interest in cycling. The mayor cycles, they have events, and they've really built a culture around bicycling as well. And they're certainly getting there. They're certainly getting there as well. Have a lot more initiatives on the books, have a lot more to go, but there has been a real role in visualization, being able to sell some of these projects in Chattanooga as well. So, of course, really getting from vision to reality is the key here. So, I'd like to take this moment to thank my friend Bert Kirkendall, who's the city transportation engineer, for his contributions to this presentation and all the hard work that he's done to really move Chattanooga forward as well. So, with that, Heidi, I think we can certainly take any questions.
Absolutely, yes.
You said that the implementation in Boston wasn't actually selected, correct?
Right.
What was selected?
There was another option where the two streets were like teed in to create a T intersection. So the Hampshire Street was kind of teed into Cambridge on both ends. There was some extra public space that was created because of that geometry. I think that's the option that's going forward with design. Right, Alan?
Yep.
I also have that on my list of questions. Another question that I have for you about the visualization is, in your studio, you use a lot of photos. You find photos to be better than plans, even if it's a photo of a similar treatment, oftentimes that's preferred over the actual plan for the street in question. And I was wondering if you kind of ever felt like certain graphics were more effective, like plan view versus the cross sections, renderings, photos.
Right. So yeah, I think each drawing type has a specific role to kind of show. And renderings are a really good way to kind of show the overall feel for what that place will transform into. It's kind of three-dimensional, ideally from like eye level perspective, so people can really imagine it. Plan views are still, I guess, a bit technical with 2D drawing when you're talking about a non-technical audience able to read that drawing. But then at times it's helpful to kind of understand how different things kind of work together, especially like the intersections. And with the rendering, like a lot of things, like a tall building will kind of hide, or a big tree will hide what's happening behind it. A plan view would be able to kind of show all of those things together. Cross sections are also kind of helpful if you want to kind of show the curve and that kind of things in it. Going back to your photos, like example images, I think those are helpful, certainly to kind of show which other places have done similar treatments and how successful they have been or not been successful. But also the follow kind of comment as well, this is not that place, right? So it's kind of helpful to show that, well, this can work in this place. So renderings are helpful that way.
Yeah, I certainly think the key to that, as you said, is the audience. A technical audience, so if you're going in to meet with a public works director or a city engineer to start to try to sell a concept, they're gonna wanna see the hardware engineering drawings with the dimensions and all of that. If you're looking at, if you're looking at the public, you know, certainly the before and afters are pretty powerful. I do think the medium you have to be careful of, and you have to know your audience. You know, some of the, with the technology today, some of these things can look so realistic that they scare people.
Yeah.
And in some cases, if you know your audience well enough, you can know that, you know, the softer hand rendering isn't as scary. I mean, you can still convey the idea and convey it in a very elegant manner, but it doesn't have that shocking realism of the hard photo simulation. And yes, you know, and the, well, that's Boston. We can't do that in the South. Or, well, that's Fort Lauderdale or West Palm, and we have snow up north, and we can't do that.
Right.
So I think you got to be careful with the pure photos. I think you have to be able to convey an idea. And I think the more that the bigger palette that you have on the photos to be able to convey those ideas, be able to show that idea from multiple places. And like you said, I think you have to be very clear up front. You know, this isn't Podunk, Iowa. This is, you know, these are from these different places, but the principles happen to be similar. And we may have something different, but a combination of things can work in other places. And
Yeah, we get that when we show a photo of the Bronx and we were trying to sell it to Brooklyn. But we really expanded our photo collection, so we could
Yeah.
always have an example from the
Same borough.
borough in question, yeah.
yeah, I mean, you know, interesting that you guys get that from some places close as that. What we get in Tennessee is you just intuitively know not to show a Nashville example in Memphis or a Knoxville example in Nashville. You know, so we call it the three states of Tennessee for a reason. You know, near the three shall meet.
Just a quick point on the watercolor. I mean, I really agree with that. Like, especially if it's early on in the process, like for the charrettes, you don't want to show, or you don't know what details you want to show. Especially even with as something as landscape, like trees can be so controversial. Which type of tree, what maintenance it requires, and watercolor will kind of, you know, help you avoid that discussion. It's like, this is going to be a tree, which will help with the shadows and stuff like that, and not get into, you know, tangential discussions.
Yeah.
So I'm the bike pedestrian coordinator for Little Rock, and Little Rock has historically tripped when our city government has tried to do public outreach and try to communicate product. So I think this is very important. Does APBP have would there be a window or an avenue to explore some of these technologies or use some of these technologies through our organization? Because I know that the city of Little Rock might not see the value in purchasing the software. Is the affiliation with this organization, would that help me get to some of these drawings?
Do you want to take that?
From the opposite side of the room. So again, Byron Russian, APBP president. We have discussed like a professional skills track at conferences. We were thinking about it for this, and we've talked about it for 2019 as well. And I'd love to hear feedback on that. If get more in depth on looking at using some of the tools. I don't know about having a license that people could like do much out of. But certainly doing more of a live demonstration of it. We've talked about that a little bit, so it's helpful to think if that's a good idea or not. But I think it for me in Atlanta, we've used some of these what I personally call the NACTO style type SketchUp designs in our past 3 iterations of guidebooks we've done in the past 3 years. And I know this is kind of becoming the visual language that a lot of communities are expecting out of their local work as they see the national work. So if we can find a way to put that into a conference session, I think that'd be really cool. So let's talk about more about that.
Also, one thing, the APP listserv is, I think, a great resource where, you know, there are examples shared, and I don't know, during the webinars and some of the kind of libraries on the website are also very helpful to gather a resource list. I don't know about software, but yeah, I mean, something.
And we've we or PBIC or other groups have hosted photo libraries
Right, exactly. yeah.
for a long time with, certain licensing restrictions that people can use photos for presentations and stuff like that. I don't know the software well enough to know if there needs to be conversations around, sharing models and stuff like that or not. So if there's room for it, I'd love to have a discussion as an association. So let's keep talking about that.
John, I think one point to bring up is, some of the things that you showed, like the street mix,
Yeah.
is free.
It's free.
I mean, it's open source. It's web. I think all you have to have is a Twitter account.
I think
log
so,
on to it.
yeah.
So you can log on to it and use it. Just use it right online. Another thing for you would be your consultant community. You could actually require some of that as part of projects. So as you want to be able to visualize things, you can tell your consulting community, hey, I want this as part of the project, and I would like a photo image of this location and what this project can actually look like.
The question in the back?
So I'm really jealous that cities are able to be doing cycle tracks. We are in a situation where we're having to do, go bike lanes, and now we're doing buffered, paint, buffered bike lanes, and everybody's all excited about that. But do you have an example where you use simulation or you used photos to go from either just a simple bike lane to a cycle track and sell it before you had to compromise at a paint-only buffer? Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's one here in Memphis, actually. I don't know if anybody, I think there's a tour on the Hamp Line tomorrow, I believe, or no, there was a tour on the Hamp Line this morning, I believe.
There's one tomorrow morning too, it's like
Okay.
9:30.
Okay, but the Hamp Line is it was the guerrilla road diet that was done on Broad Avenue where what I call the nuclear house paint was used as the temporary paint that the artist community got out and did their road diet with what they said was temporary paint. Oh, it's interior house paint, it'll wash off. 7 years later, the paint's still there. I really want some of that paint for my house next time I paint the inside. Never have to paint again. Anyway, but yes, Christine, absolutely, that, they did that, and because of the success of that effort, they were really looking at, okay, now how do we make this permanent, and how do we get the best facility? So they did we did a design charrette for them, 3-day design charrette, to really look at options on how to reallocate that pavement on a permanent basis. We came up with a 2-way cycle track that's actually going to be curb and planter protected. So it'll be physical curbs. They built one segment of it with paint and bollards. The other 2 segments are funded through CMAQ. TDOT's doing final review. They should bid those segments, which would be the Tillman segment and the Arts District segment. Those should be bid later in the summer. So that's a case of where something was done initially with just the buffered bike lanes, and now it's which is buffered bike lanes on either side of the road, now it's being converted to a 2-way cycle.
It's fair though, because they could actually feel, they could actually bike on
Right.
it, in a temporary condition. So if I don't have the opportunity to do a guerrilla or a technical project, simulation's so powerful that you can
Yeah.
drive or ride the corridor in the simulation. Can I get away with that and still
Do you-
get the full protected?
In Fort Lauderdale, have you guys ever had an open streets event?
Yeah.
'Cause I know we're doing
about 3
those in
years,
Chattanooga.
and It actually got canceled this year because it has not been.
There's a lot of cities, like in Charlotte, Charlotte's getting ready to do some of their first cycle tracks, and it was demonstrated through a weekend open streets event, to where they used temporary measures, used planters, and set them up in the streets, and chalked out the protected buffers, and so that's certainly a way to do that, and it's non-threatening with the agencies if you'll do it on a weekend, because you're not dealing with closing down a street or necking down a street for peak hour traffic. Say you do it on a weekend, you document the success, and it is one thing that can start to build community momentum to make it permanent. So if you got some candidate corridors, I'd suggest that maybe you try to do an open streets event to actually do that on a weekend. The Hamp Line was hatched on a weekend event in 2010, and now it's they've seen over $20 million of reinvestment in the corridor, 30 new businesses, as well as a brew pub. Not a brew pub, but a brewery. Has anybody sampled Wiseacre beer while they're here? Yeah. Tiny Bomb? Yeah. Amazing award-winning beer brewed right here in Memphis, and the brewery's located right on Broad Avenue, right on the Hamp Line.
Another question I had that both of you kind of touched on was, and you can definitely see it being an issue, is that some of these renderings, they look so good. They look better than they're ever gonna look. As soon as the paint goes down the ground, you have utility companies, needing to sketch out where their things are underground, or people parking illegally. Maybe that happens more in New York than it happens here. Other sorts of activities that make it look like not quite as nice. And Wade, you had the example of Broad Street where you sort of had to have this full vision and then the interim plan. And I wonder how well it went to sort of walk it back with the community, or any other sort of takeaways you guys want to share about that.
With Broad Street, because they brought the community along through the charrette process, at the very beginning they said it might have to be staged. And we did show a temporary condition at the charrette, which resembled what actually got built. We did away with the flexible delineators and ended up doing the vertical curve, the extruded vertical curve as the separator. So they've just managed the community expectation. It wasn't perceived as a bait and switch, but the city and the foundations backing it have always said, in the fullness of time, this is our intent, is to do this and widen the sidewalks. To be able to do that, I think some of your other, there are cases, I can think of two right here in Memphis, where the original photo renderings greatly resemble what has been done. And I think both of them have been the subject of tours. The Peabody Place, the Great Streets event from last night, the renderings of that very closely resemble what was actually done out there. Now, it wasn't a high-cost reconstruction initiative. And then the medical district, the Edge district, where the red epoxy gravel and the planters and all of that, those with the wind sculpture above the intersection, those all very much resemble what was shown in the original design document as well. I think one of the critical elements, especially as you start to get into some of the bigger construction projects and the reconstruction projects, that I don't know that it's necessarily that what gets built doesn't resemble the photos when it opens, but over time, lack of maintenance can make it look, if you got weeds in your rain garden, or if the planters aren't maintained, those are the kinds of things that can start to sour people. So, really the ongoing maintenance, you got to make sure that whatever municipality is building it has a commitment to ongoing maintenance, keeping the weeds out, keeping the plants watered, all of those kinds of items.
Yeah, one thing I'll add is, it depends on the project, right? I mean, if it's kind of a tactical urbanism, or it's kind of only transportation for the project, then you might get into trouble with showing renderings that are too good, which don't end up happening. But if it's a signature transformative project that is being looked at by the city as this downtown project that's going to transform in terms of economic development, this redevelopment and stuff like that, you really want to bring the whole community together, and the city needs to be excited about this project. And renderings like these really help that. It's almost like an advertisement, so you don't want to sell it short at first, especially. But then again, managing expectations as the project kind of moves forward is also critical. So it's not just, as I said, it's not just like one deliverable at one stage, but it's kind of an ongoing process, and kind of keeping all the stakeholders and community members engaged as it changes. But I think it's very important at the start to get everybody excited, and renderings really have power to do that. Okay, Nick.
Nick Falvo here. I do a lot of visualization for Alta with Wade. And
very nice visualizations.
Thanks, Wade. That last question is actually a really good one, because I think you two talk about how the reality doesn't live up to the visualization. People park in the bike lanes, it's not used the way it's supposed to be used. I think you can actually use that in the visualizations themselves. And I've definitely done visualizations where I'm showing alternatives between a bike lane and a buffered bike lane and a separated bike lane. And in my separated bike lane, which is wider and has room for riding side by side and is comfortable because it's like separated with a planter, like a really high quality facility, I will show a child riding there. I would not show that same child riding in the bike lane alternative. You can actually use the visualization to communicate far more than just the dimensions or the cross section. And that if you've got, let's say, maybe there's no vertical element in your separated bike lane, it's a parking protected bike lane, nudge that car into the bike lane like it's gonna be in real life, you know? Show how this difference in design has a difference in use.
Right.
You know, you could even show a car parked in the bike lane and say this is, you know, potentially of the design. So I think it's actually an opportunity to better communicate the realities of what these really do mean in the future in terms of how they're going to be used, and that is should be a part of the discussion when people are evaluating these things.
Yeah. Funny thing, Nick. I mean, in some circles, like you're in Memphis, you know, there's people that actually on the hamp line where the temporary paint is today. If somebody pulls through the buffer in the angle parking into the bike lane, they're very likely to get shamed on social media. So somebody will take a photo, post it, and say, hopefully this isn't anyone's car. Please don't park in the bike lane anymore.
I have one more. You mentioned that you had sort of a multidisciplinary team there, and that there was a head architect. And I sort of wondered, I mean, I only have my municipality to kind of go on, in which we sort of have, you know, a multidisciplinary team, but, you know, heads of each, and when they're sort of at loggerheads over some design issue or whatever, they sort of like duke it out. And I sort of wondered, I think the multidisciplinary team is great, but how do you sort of resolve things if, you know, the engineers don't agree with the architects or things like that, or is that?
It just never happens. It just never happens. Everybody's all happy and they, no, absolutely. And I mean, there are things, now what, you know, what CDOT has been able to do, it was a group that was brought in that was developed from its infancy. So it was brought in with, you know, enlightened people. Now, you know, that said, you know, I think they inherited a couple of legacy people that, and every agency has them, that over time, you know, the voices of the many and the voices from the top down, basically is the edict that, no, this is the way we're going to do things. And that's, you know, that's happened in Chattanooga. It's not as much of a democracy as it is a benevolent dictatorship. I think we see that in this city as well. But, you know, these are directives that are coming down from the mayor, that this is what I want to see, this person is in charge, and everybody else fall into line, because this is, you know, this is the program that I want to see. So I think that leadership starts at the top, and you know, in the public sector, people that don't follow directions from the top typically don't last, and kind of is the way it is.
Well, I can just add from my experience internally within our team when we work with different disciplines, someone with a background in architecture, urban design, coming into a field that is traditionally been traffic engineering focused, I would say my kind of thinking is, you gotta pick your battles. You know, is that fight worth kind of losing the whole buffered bike lane over? Or would a buffered bike lane be actually helpful to the community rather than having it look the best and the brightest and, like, you know? So it kind of depends on issues that you kind of tackle and resolve.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. It really is, you can't be afraid to compromise. And I think you can compromise on design decisions. What I don't think you can compromise on is the ultimate vision or the design intent.
Right.
So, you know, we worked with the city of Russellville, Arkansas, in developing a one-way cycle track that actually started in the charrette as a two-way. And what we found out when we got out there to start trying to build it was that, oh, by the way, if you shift the center line of the road, you've got to demo 3/4 of a mile of 8 inches of concrete slab that is the underlying road bed for what was the former state highway. And so, you know, either you could demo the road or you could build the project, is what it basically came down to from a budgetary standpoint. So not being afraid to compromise, being able to figure out what an alternatives that met that design intent, and in that situation, it was maintaining the center line, converting from a two-way to one-way, which allowed you to maintain the center line exactly where it was, and you didn't have to get into slab demolition. But it still met the design intent.
And, you know, constraints like those actually help bring out innovative solutions.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not just write out an actor and put it in, you have to kind of work it out for specific conditions.
Great. Well, unless there's any other questions, one last chance, we'll finish a couple minutes early. Great.
Thank you.